eventually I was working in-house at Element, and then they didn't want me there anymore. They're like this.
They didn't want
yeah,
you.
they didn't. I was no longer wanted. I think I was expensive.
Slowly, there's like no chair at your desk.
Yeah.
Then you come in,
they're filing 6 inches off it every day. Like
there's no desk. You're like,
yeah. Oh no, it must be the janitor.
Yeah,
Janitor must have moved things around.
I have no idea.
They let me go, and I don't know whether I was unaffordable or attituded poorly, or maybe everything, they let me go, and it was crazy. The drive home that day, Jim calls me, and he's like, "Hey man, we want you back. Get back in. Antahira needs you. We need you. Get back in." And I was really scared because I had this position and this livelihood for a while. And I was raising kids. You just want stability and something you can count on every day. And maybe some things you're working on aren't your best work ever, but you're making sacrifices in order to provide your kids with a home, And that's what I'd been doing since I lived in LA. And doing it as an artist is it's fucking hard, man.
Yeah.
And you get accolades the same way, wow, you rode a skateboard and you were able to buy a house by rolling around on that thing, And they're like, you're able to buy a house by doing this with your wrist, doing this dopey crap, And so I felt so lucky to have anything. And so when that job was kind of taken away from me, I got scared for the sake of my kids and for the sake of this promise that I made to them by just bringing them into the world. So Jim calling me, I started crying when he called me. It was extremely impactful. And let's edit that out, the crying part. I started laughing when Jim called me, so I was off to the races.
That's amazing. So when you came back around, were you right back in with Julian again?
Yeah.
Just kind of all right, let's brainstorm.
Well, and it's not like it wasn't like he and I hadn't talked in 10 years either. Mm-hmm. We always stayed in touch, and we always talked about stuff. And I don't want to mystify it too much. He and I just put our heads together really well. We always have, and we make each other laugh. And he'll throw an idea at me, and then I'll have an idea on how to make that more visual, and then he'll come in with the home run idea to make that B- idea into an A+ idea. He's just so good. So it's always been a very comfortable process working with him for me, and it's resulted in a lot of stuff that I'm really proud of. And so it was just hey, you're back in. Let's do this huge series. Welcome you back. What are we gonna do? Let's do the pigeons.
Perfect. Here comes March of the fucking Horribles.
Yeah, exactly. March of the Stinkers.
So you brought the pigeon back with a whole new series when you jump back in with Antahira.
Right. Pigeons Revenge.
Awesome. That's so
we
awesome.
did Pigeons Revenge. And the thing is, I'd always, even though the pigeon thing sort of as a company, mascot was long abandoned, I'd always drawn and painted them as cards for friends, or as illustrations for friends as gifts or whatever, just as jokes, gift cards and that kind of shit. And so I'd always stuck with them, and Julian had always loved it.
Yeah.
And really, it was his thing.
Yeah, it just reflects on your actual experiences out there when you're skating, and you see them, and you're like, oh, the ones that are next to the fast food joint, you're like, oh, they look rough because they're existing off of the refuse from the fast food joint, and they're just one leg,
they don't stand a chance,
one eye, the beak's like a fucking upturned hook, it's ugly. So I think that's where that came from, right? Just from skating around and you see it and you're like, wow.
Well, especially San Francisco, because San Francisco is so dense. And so unlike places like LA where you live in a residential area, you might not see pigeons unless you go to another spot where there's this decay. But here, especially in the 90s and before, the decay and the shine were all pressed up against each other.
Yeah.
So you'd be biking or skating through something, and you'd see every sector of society as you went through. So you'd see the worst shit next to the best shit.
Yeah.
And so the pigeons here are particularly rough and particularly visible. So you saw like everyone, you'd see ones like flying by with like a plastic trash bag like knotted around them, and it'd be like flying by.
Yeah, I mean,
and
it's funny
club
because
feet.
a lot of the stuff that you come up with, it's like, no, some of that stuff's actually.
No, it's just journalism.
Yeah.
It's not. I'm not making it up. I'm
Yeah.
like, I saw that. Like
There
that
it
one had
is.
a sandwich bag hanging out of its butthole.
Totally.
Like I gotta draw that. You
Yeah.
know, I'm gonna tone it down if anything.
Working with Julian was like the one thing, that I don't know how we could delve into that a little bit more.
I think I know.
But-
I mean, we could definitely talk about the way that Julian and I work together.
Yeah.
I'm trying to give you an edit.
Yeah,
pause here.
no. Well, you don't have to edit any of it out.
But it generally starts with like, hey, it's almost like plastics. Like he'll call me, I'll get a message like, hey, why don't you do something about plastics? And like, hey, yeah, that's good, Or just recently, I was like, hey, I just want to do something about science. Like, just let me, do something about science.
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, all right, you got it. Just show me the sketches. And so I'll draw it all out, and I'll do like, good sketches that I'm like proud of, and then I'll send them to him. I'll just, text them to him.
Sure.
He looks at them. I'll send him like 4 or 5, and he'll go like, hey, those 3 are really good. Those 2, you can do better. and then, or he'll say like, hey, what about, let's get a mushroom cloud in there. Like, let's do something nuclear. And like, of course. Why didn't I think? Like, half the time he's making suggestions, and I'm like, man, I should have thought of that. What's wrong with me? And so it just works like that back and forth.
Yeah.
And then, it'll often start with like just a suggestion from him, or because we both try and read a lot. So it's like you read about something that pisses you off, and then you're like, hey man, I'm really like pissed off about like, science or whatever, something random, or homelessness, let's do something about homelessness, how can we do that? And like, and you start bending it around. So you take these really sincere, heavy subjects and, throw them in the laundry with like a bunch of tie-dye, and like you pull them out and you barely recognize the original inception, but there is a start and a finish to it that's recognizable. But yeah, and there's times where I'll be like, Julian, I got nothing, man. I got nothing. Or he'll call me, same thing, like, I don't know, man, I got nothing. And then it's like, well, okay, I'm going to do a series about shit. Like, just trust me. It's going to be about bowel movements. I got this. Or vice versa,
it's gonna be about bowel movements.
Or vice versa.
I'd be like,
yeah. We'll see.
yeah. I think, a lot of the intent from Julian is philosophical, right? Like, it comes from a different place. And like you said, it can end up it usually ends up in a very comedic space, right? Like,
Well, it
it's
sort of
usually pretty
has
damn
to.
funny.
That's the goal.
It's coming from this really heavy, kind of sincere place to filtered through like the humor fucking filter, right?
Well, because you kind of have to, because who wants to be told how to live their life by their skateboard graphic?
Yeah.
You don't
Totally.
want like some political speech on the bottom of your board or like some screed.
Yeah.
Like you sort of gotta like, you gotta stick. It's like Bill Cosby. You gotta put that roofie in the drink that tastes good. You can't just pop that roofie in someone's mouth. They're not gonna go for that. So you gotta sneak up on people to make it to get to that philosophy you're talking about.
Of course, yeah. No, I that's why I love what Julian does. I love what Antihero does, and the way you visually represent some of the ideas. I think, and because usually what you do is you refine it to a point of simplicity, and it gets a message across in a very simple way. But that's the beauty of it.
Hopefully, I mean that's the goal.
Well, yeah, but when shit is overly thought and it's just you're like, so like verbose, you're like, some words, all those words. I don't need all those words. Go away.
I mean, it's a blessing and a curse though, because if you do it right, then you're proud of yourself, and it came out right, and some people laughed, and like,
Well, hopefully,
LOL, you get some reactions. But the downside is you're like, okay, you gotta sustain that level,
Right.
and you can't really settle for like, hey, I'm gonna take our logo and rotate it and splatter it with paint.
Right.
You can't really do that. The expectations are set in a way where you can't really autopilot stuff with Antihero. So it's a challenge. It's definitely a challenge.
Antihero is one that you can't do that with. I mean, with most everything else you can, but you can't. And Julian, being the person that he is, he wouldn't allow it. anyway,
That's the bottom line. The bottom line is his expectations are so high, and he's so whatever the opposite of lazy is. You just can't get lazy.
I think it's unlazy.
Yeah. That's.
I think
I'm sure you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The idea of even seeming for a moment to be lazy or like, you just see a lot of skateboard companies that have been around for a long time that are really lazy right now.
Yeah.
Visually.
Sure.
Not their skaters or not their team, but just like visually, it's just like, flush some tie-dye through it.
Yeah.
Rasta colors.
Well, right now, there's a real interesting shift that's happened in the last 2 years with skate graphics. Like it's gone in more of like the sort of, I don't know, creative vein,
art school.
Yeah, and it's being accepted, which is interesting to me.
Yeah.
Okay, let me just ask you that. What do you derive more pleasure from? Is when people like your work or are offended by it?
It's that's an easy question to answer. I love it when people get pinched. I love it when the right people have the right reaction.
Yeah.
When like the people whose sense of humor you respect. Like if I see you and you're like, man, that thing you did, you're tweaked. That just fills me with joy. And if some anonymous person is like, some anonymous person sends me some message on Instagram about how mad they are at like something I did about Trump or something I did about, injustice in the world or something, that makes me feel just as good.
Yeah.
Like getting, it's like taking a magnifying glass over a den of red ants, like here goes. Those retards are going to come streaming out any second. And so, and I don't do it to piss people off. You do it to make people think, but some of the people are going to think and it's going to set chemicals going in the wrong way and they're going to get nutty. And some people are going to think and laugh. And I mean, also the other thing too is if you can get a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old who's never thought about homelessness before, to think about homelessness for a minute based on something you saw in a skateboard shop, like that's pretty great.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I achieved that goal, but I might come close sometimes. And that might make the world a better place.
Yeah.
In a really weird, cruel way, But
well, yeah, I mean, I figured you strike me as somebody who would appreciate the person being more offended.
Oh, I love it.
Like, did my job, yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But at the same time, I don't want to just offend for offensiveness' sake,
No, of course not.
But when some people don't get it and get offended, that's funny, and when some people do get it and get offended, that's funny too. But I don't say that I live from a furious moment to furious moment where I'm like, when's the next person going to come at me with some anger,
Right.
like, but it does, I do get a little gleeful when people,
I figured.
overreact.
Okay, let me ask you this then. Is there anything that is exempt? Is anything that's untouchable? Like any topic that you're like, I'll never touch that one. Like, cause I mean, you've done some stuff that's definitely gonna, put a wrinkle in some motherfucker's shirt.
Right. I'd say like 9/11 jokes. I haven't done anything about that really, and towers burning or planes crashing into towers. There's a lot to work with there, man. And like, think about everything that's been done with
the
like
conspiracies too, right?
Well, there's the tinfoil hat side of it, but there's also just like, like those steel girders shouldn't have melted. There's that side, but there's also just like, hey, there were hundreds and hundreds of people in those buildings that died.
Yeah.
And in those planes. And, you think about like the Hindenburg exploding, and that's been like one of the most famous bands from our lifetime. That was their logo, so it's not like you can't mess with, molten death, but there's something about a visual 9/11 joke that I don't think I'm going to touch. That's the first thing that comes to mind. I mean, and the same way, like, like whatever, like coat hanger baby jokes, or just these kind of like grosser than gross kind of jokes, that it's not that it's untouchable. It's just, I don't know if it's really funny or the funny that I'm hoping to be. So I don't know. I haven't really given that. It's a good question. Those are the first two things that come to mind.
Yeah. I'm just curious because I think that in comedy, because that's how I approach your work a lot of times. This shit's just funny, and I think depending on who delivers it, it could remain funny in the way it's delivered or the context, right?
I also think like explaining what's funny and what's not, and defining things is just kind of lame. Like I don't think it's. The more you talk about what's funny and what's not, the more you sound like a douche.
Yeah, for sure. I'm just curious. So you kind of answered, like, there is sort of a ceiling, or perhaps a place that you may not go visually.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I think everybody's got that.
Yeah, I would hope so.
Yeah.
Okay, now super quick, just as for all the artists out there in the world, like the 9 to 5 versus freelance, because you've had both. When you were doing the 9 to 5, how did you deal with literally having to be at work at 8 o'clock? I mean, most creative people, not all, not perhaps you, but we have our fucking issues, and we don't get up at 7.
Right.
And like make coffee and put on our fucking, our pants one
Cinch
leg at
it
a time.
up
We're
and
like trying to put
do the ironing.
both legs in one
Yeah.
fucking pant leg. You're like,
Right.
why isn't this working? Oh.
Check the batteries on your pager. Yeah. I back then it wasn't that hard for me because it wasn't like I was drinking that heavily. I wasn't going that hard at night, and I really enjoyed the job. I really valued that job a lot, and that never really went away. And so getting to work on time was not hard. The hardest part was that I had a car. And so many people that worked at Deluxe, mostly the shippers, didn't have cars.
Nobody had cars.
So I was picking them up, and like when you see those trucks in India that are just piled up with people in the back, it was like that. Where I'd be driving in my car, and there'd be like some dude's butt from South Carolina pressed up against my face. They'd be in there like it was a fucking clown car every day, because there was the only way. So I'd be like, hey, be in front of my house at 7:42. That's when the ship sails.
Yeah.
And so the hardest part was like, and that was before cell phones. So you're like, hey, Larry's running late. It was never that. It was either there or not. So getting there was never a problem to get there on time. And while sure at 8:02 you might not be like flying high, but you had stuff to do, and the deadlines were really steep. And I've always been very deadline driven, so it wasn't that hard. It really wasn't, and because I wasn't staying up until 3 or 4,
Yeah.
most of the time. I was single and lonely most of the time too, so I was like in bed at 11:01. So that wasn't hard for me, and it's never really been that hard for me. And I think a lot of people are surprised when I tell them like, yeah, I sit down at my desk, and I'm usually starting work by 8:30. Or 9 at the latest if I go during the summer when the ocean's warm. I'm in the ocean in the morning, and then I get to work. And so I'll be sitting down before 9 to work, and I'll work until I either run out of gas or I have to go do something with my kids or something else comes up. But like I'll go all day and sometimes into the night. But I like that regimentation, and I like having those deadlines, and I like a rigidity. I also like the guilt that deadlines creates, because that is very motivating. When there's like a group of people up north in San Francisco that are all your friends, and if you don't get this done on time, they're all gonna be bummed at you. You're gonna like be letting other people down. That weighs on me heavily, and so that really keeps me working.
I just always tripped up. I mean, you did the 9 to 5, you went to freelance, and how you can figure out how to stay on course because of you're managing yourself in your own time, and your deadlines. They come from another place, but they're a lot of the times they're sort of implemented by oneself, right? Like, I'm trying to get this project done by this time, by this date, but it's all very flexible because there may be a real reason why the deadlines exist.
I tend to not let anybody that I'm doing work for let me know that it's flexible. Right. I don't want anyone to tell me that it's flexible, because then I'll just be like, well, shit, if that's flexible, I'll do this that's not flexible.
Right.
And so everybody just gives me a date. Like, Penthouse is due this day, so I work backwards from that and schedule it. Anti-Hero is due this day, so I work backwards from there. It's just working backwards and planning it out. And I make it sound like I'm really good at it, and I always hit on my deadlines, and I don't. But I definitely come close to it, and I need that structure. And I write everything down. I'm pretty organized because I don't trust myself to do things right when I'm not organized.
Oh, there you go. From the chicken's mouth. From the pigeon's mouth. What do you think?
I think we did a pretty good job.
I think there's 3 minutes in there, 3-minute edit, probably out of 2 hours?
We could boil it down to 30 seconds,
Just sound bites.
Yeah.
Talking heads.
Hand gestures.
We could do some miming.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Todd.
Thank you. It's
Awesome.
fun.
Yeah.